Tales of Arise is coming out very soon for PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, and I was fortunate enough to get an early code sent by Bandai Namco so I could bring you guys my opinion on what it's all about. I'm almost 10 hours into the game, so while this isn't the full review with a score at the end, it's fair to say that I've seen a lot of what this game has to offer. And I also think it's important for you guys to know my background when it comes to Tales, and I don't think it's fair to say that I've played a Tales game in the past. I've tried a couple, but never really spent hours playing any of them, because these games never grab me. And it's odd because I do play a lot of games in this genre, but Tales, for some reason, always felt like it was a step behind other JRPGs, so it always felt like my time was better spent playing something else. And I don't think this game is any different. I don't want to sound too rough from the get-go, I think this game is fine. And if you're a Tales fan, I think you'll be happy with Arise. But if you're like me, who first saw this Tales in trailers and gameplay demos and said, finally, they're making a true open world. You run into a monster and you just fight it right there and then. They're finally bringing Tales up to the next level. That's not really what's happening. Back when I played the demo, I thought it was a bad demo for multiple reasons. There was too much to the combat system for the time they had to teach you about mechanics, so it felt confusing, maybe a bit overwhelming. And I was nitpicking a lot of small things that you guys said in the comments are just things that Tales games have done for a very long time. The thing is, it's not just things that Tales games have done for a very long time, it's things that JRPGs have done for a long time. And most of these things have been refined and polished. They have evolved to the point that I wasn't expecting to see them in a new game in 2021 because I thought we had moved past it. But now looking back, I think it was a bad demo mainly because it was a demo built for Tales fans instead of being a demo that aims at bringing new fans to the series. And now playing the final game, it makes total sense because this whole game feels like it was built for Tales fans and not new fans coming into the series. The game is really good at setting up the scene and world building. There are two races, the Danans and the Renans. The Renans are the oppressors here. They've come to this world basically to farm the Danans' life energy. They're technologically superior and they can wield magic known as astral arts in this game. You start as a slave and you're mining for resources, but really what Renans are actually mining is everyone's energy as they're forced into hard labor. And it's in breaking these shackles that our hero's journey begins. You meet a girl that shocks everyone who touches her, but you immediately resonate with her because your character does not feel pain. This girl wants to help you take down each of the 5 lords that are gathering energy from your people, but she is actually a Renan. She belongs to the enemy race. And that's when the game starts tackling themes like racism, classism, sometimes being a bit superficial and heavy-handed with stuff like, hey, just because you're a Danan doesn't mean you're a good person and vice versa. And this is a topic that prevails during the whole section that I played, and even though it touches on those topics consistently, it just feels like everything it has to say on the subject is very superficial. But as you battle to free your people from this mountainous region full of volcanic activity, you explore different areas infested with monsters, gather resources, meet a group of slaves in a small village, with side quests, crafting, the usual. Structurally, this game is very old school, is what you would expect from any JRPG, sometimes to a fault I would say, because a lot of this quest design is super outdated. Imagine you just traversed a long section and you enter a village. The first person you meet on that village has a side quest asking you to kill 7 wolves in the area you just came from. So now you gotta backtrack and go back to kill 7 wolves instead of moving forward. I'm not even making this up, this is a real quest in the game and it happens all the time. But again, this is just something that Tales has always done. But I feel like most RPGs are moving away from these types of fetch quests and grind quests and trying to make each quest a bit more interesting. Each quest should matter, it should tell you a bit more about the world or develop a certain location's lore or a character. And I don't feel that effort here in Tales. A lot of these side quests just feel like filler. There are some quality of life features though. If you happen to already have the items required to finish a quest, you can just finish it before you even accept it. And that's nice, it immediately rewards you for the exploration you did beforehand. So you fight your way through this area, which you may have noticed is not really an open world. Tales has kept this structure of sectioned off areas, where you load into a zone, do your exploration, and then load into the next. And when there's combat, it loads into a combat arena. You don't just fight out there in the world, as many JRPGs are doing nowadays. Some of these areas are quite open, others are a bit smaller, some even work as dungeons with very light puzzle elements, but for the most part, you run while looking for collectibles, you fight enemies, and you look for the exit. It's very straightforward. As you defeat the boss, which by the way, boss fights in this game are fantastic. They all have unique mechanics, they force you to adapt and think on your feet, and feature some heavy cinematic moments. I loved all the boss fights that I played so far. But as you defeat the boss, you liberate this area. You've defeated one of the 5 lords that have invaded the world of the Danans, and you're ready to move on to the next one. And this one is in a brand new zone. It's not the volcanic mountainous region anymore, it's an area full of snow where it's always nighttime. There aren't any slaves around, but that doesn't mean oppression isn't isn't a big problem. In fact, in this place, even Danans will sell out their own race, because the lord of this area rewards those who do and heavily punishes those who break the rules. It's a completely different vibe from what we had in the first area. Depending on where we are and who the leader is, the entire place feels different. Its people behave differently, they have unique struggles, and this has been by far my favorite part of Tales of Arise. The world building is phenomenal, and a lot of these areas are gorgeous. It's a game that makes me want to see what the next zone will be all about, and I think that is quite the achievement. That said, the story itself feels rather basic right now. It's a story of a typical hero that wants to free his people, and it's had its twists and turns, but very often I don't feel like the game earns the twists or even explains them. The characters are also not grabbing me in any major way. Most of them feel very one note. I mean, you're gonna have a big party of heroes, you saw that in the demo, but each individual hero doesn't have a lot of personality. You've got the main character who will just do good no matter the circumstances. You've got the tsundere who has an interesting background, but so far has just been the typical tsundere. So even though I love the world building and I want to see more of it, the story itself really hasn't grabbed me yet. But I've always been a gameplay first kind of guy. Some games I want to power through because I like the story, but if the gameplay is good, I can handle whatever story you throw at me. And I've avoided talking about combat so far on purpose, because this is where the whole thing kind of falls apart for me. As I said previously, one of the reasons why I thought the demo was bad was because it just threw a bunch of mechanics at you without the proper time to introduce them. This is not a problem in the final game. The game takes its time going from the very basics of combat and slowly builds up systems, and it's definitely been a lot more enjoyable that way. You have a ton of abilities for each character, and each of them have their own gimmicks and playstyle, and I really love that. Combat feels polished, there are a lot of ability combinations you can use for combos, no matter which character you choose to play as. And you can swap between characters on the fly if you just want to jump between different styles mid-battle. The AI on my partners makes it really hard to enjoy this battle system. And conceptually, I just don't like how the combat works. The basics of combat are fine, as I mentioned, but I feel like instead of focusing on those, I have to spend my time babysitting my party whenever there's an encounter that's slightly harder than average. Take these gargoyles, for example. These are just regular enemies, but they showcase what I mean perfectly. These gargoyles will roar, and then they will sit down and turn to stone while aiming at a character. As soon as they land, they will not move. They will not turn, they will just stare forward for like 5 seconds. After that, they will shoot a laser that kills any character or at least brings them down to 1 HP. So if they're aiming at me, that's easy. I just move out of the way. I've got plenty of time. But this dumbass AI will not dodge out of the way. If I'm playing the game, if I'm dealing damage and dodging when I need to, I would expect my AI partners to do the same. And this small example only gets worse during boss fights, at which point, if your party starts dying, you're playing catch up. You're reviving, you're healing, you're constantly pausing and switching characters so they move out of the way. It breaks the flow of combat and it doesn't let you focus on the fun part. And you can customize the AI behavior quite a bit, and you even have the option to just select keep away, so characters would stop attacking and just play it safe whenever they're below a certain health threshold. But even if they're staying away, they'll still get hit by ranged attacks. There's no instruction to dodge. They just won't do it. I actually just had a conversation with a friend who also got a code, and he did not feel this problem at all. In fact, he has a couple of examples of characters being godlike at dodging. So I don't know what's going on there. I don't know why my experience has been so different from his. But another aspect of combat that I think it's fundamentally flawed is that this game is balanced for you to tackle encounters as a party. And the party that you get in this game is way too big. On your own, you don't deal enough damage to defeat a stronger enemy. Your damage comes from your whole party working together as a team. So when that team starts dying or they're not pulling their own weight, it's really frustrating. And the more characters are in your party, the less powerful you feel, because the bosses are only going to scale up the more members you have available. And these combat issues, together with the fact that the story isn't really grabbing me, is what makes it hard for me to recommend this game. And I do think it has a lot of good stuff going for it, but I have a hard time recommending this at full price when it feels like JRPGs nowadays are doing way more than what Tales is offering. Tales is a 25-year-old series. It's a big one that could potentially rival the likes of Final Fantasy, and who knows, even be more popular than Final Fantasy, because it was the game that brought action to JRPGs. And in a way, it feels like it was a game built for me, because the trend of making every JRPG have an action combat component has been one that I've enjoyed a lot in recent years. If you take Final Fantasy going from 12 to 15 and now to 7 Remake, you can see an evolution of the combat in the series, leaving turn-based battles behind and becoming a more action-focused game. And it's an evolution that culminates beautifully in the combat system of 7 Remake, and I love that combat so much. But even back on Final Fantasy 12 in 2006, Tales was already doing action combat back then. Tales should be leading our RPGs in action combat because of how long they've been doing it, and yet it doesn't feel like it's pushing the genre forward. If anything, it feels like it's once again a step behind the curve. Perhaps out of fear of losing that core audience that loves these games so much, but in doing so, it's hurting its own progress and potential to expand to a larger audience. Tales of Arise isn't a bad game at all, and Tales fans are probably used to this by now because this is exactly the type of game they want. And I'm not here to judge, I'm just here to try to explain why I don't think this is the game for me. Because I bet that just like me, there were many others who saw the trailers and gameplay demos for this Tales game and thought this was gonna be it, their first Tales game. But in my opinion, even though it does a lot of things well, if I had to choose where to spend my 60 bucks, I probably wouldn't choose this. Now, this was sort of a generic overview of the entire game without going into a lot of specifics, but if you'd like to hear more about this, I made a video with my friend Rurikan over on his channel where we spend an hour talking about the game. And Rurikan had a much better experience than me. He's actually looking forward to finishing the game. So it's a nice contrast if you'd like to see someone with a different point of view. There really is no right or wrong in this conversation. There was just a different experience and different values placed on certain aspects of the game. So I highly recommend you guys give it a watch. I'll leave a link down below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. My name's Globku and I'll see you next time. Bye!